Great program today. Again, my name is Lou, Program Director at Citizens Campaign for the Environment. We do public education on a range of environmental issues. We also do advocacy to help promote different kinds of policy solutions to address some of the challenges that we've been talking about today. And perhaps most importantly, we do grassroots community organizing to help mobilize people power needed to actually make that change happen. And so I don't have a presentation today, but I have a few things I want to talk to you all about with respect to disposable bags. I have a few fact sheets in the back as well, and I encourage everybody to stop by the table and take some of those materials home with you, as well as some of the other great educational literature that's back there. And so on the issue of disposable bags, I think many of the folks in this room probably are familiar with the argument, the environmental argument for eliminating single-use plastic bags, but that conversation has evolved over time in a number of ways. We're in Westport. Westport happens to be the first town east of the Mississippi to take action on plastic bags back in 2007. It was over 10 years ago already. It's kind of hard to believe that, but at that time the conversation was almost entirely focused on the impacts of plastic on the marine environment, the pollution challenges that plastic that plastic pose to our communities. Okay, these kinds of things. But that narrative has evolved and changed significantly over time, especially in the context of some of the solid waste challenges that Jen and Cheryl and Lou spoke about before me. And so it's really an exciting time to be talking about this. And so I want to touch on that a little bit, but I want to also expand that a little bit more broadly to single-use plastics in general. And so, Jen and Cheryl explained the problem, pretty succinctly. In Connecticut, we've got municipalities suffering from capacity challenges. Lou touched on the fact that there's not really efficient end markets for these recycled materials here in Connecticut, and the fact that our system doesn't cover all the various different types of waste that are actually out there. This, of course, has been exacerbated by the Chinese national green sort policy. So the Chinese have closed their doors to any kind of contamination over 0.5% contaminated. And so what we're seeing here in Connecticut is municipal recovery facilities where bales of plastic and printed paper and cardboard are just piling up. And whereas, once again, as municipalities used to be able to turn a profit of maybe a few $1,000s a month selling those commodities to China, now they're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of recycling costs every single month just to deal with those materials. And so, once again, as has been already said today, we have a need to promote and implement policies that help us to reduce the amount of waste we're generating through source reduction and improve the recycling system in a number of different areas. And so we have, this year we're focusing our efforts on educating the public about single-use plastics. These are plastics, you've heard that term thrown around a lot. These are plastics that are used once and then they're discarded. They're not typically reused in any meaningful way. And approximately 40% of all the plastics that are in production today fall under this single-use kind of category. As most folks know, plastics do not biodegrade. In the environment, they break down into smaller and smaller pieces called microplastics, and that poses a huge risk to aquatic wildlife and different kinds of marine species. And more than 300 tons of plastics are produced here in the U.S. every single year. The recycling rate on that is extremely low. Fewer than about 13% of those plastics are in fact recycled properly. And so we view this as a common sense place to start when we talk about reducing the amount of plastic that we're generating into the waste stream, okay? Plastic bags here in Connecticut, we don't really have a good handle on how much we're consuming on an annual basis, but it's somewhere between 800 million and 1 billion plastic bags every year here in Connecticut. In addition, to littering our communities and the impacts that they have on wildlife. They also cost taxpayers money, both through the litter collection piece of it, but also more importantly, as Jen touched on very effectively before, that these bags create costly delays for MRFs. And a single MRF, just to give you some perspective on this, can actually waste up to 2,000 man-hours per year dealing with the bags, pulling them out of the sorting infrastructure. So this is a significant source of wasted taxpayer funding. Now, 5 different communities in Connecticut actually have legislation on the books dealing with plastic bags. That's Westport, Greenwich, Stamford, Weston, and most recently Norwalk, Connecticut, actually just within the last week passed a ban on plastic bags with a fee on paper. And that fee on paper is really critical and central to how we're approaching this issue. Because once again, the conversation used to be all about plastic bags, but what Westport has in effect, which is just a ban on plastic, that's what we refer to as a first-generation bag ban. And this is the same type of policy that we saw being passed in other states, in California and some other areas. The challenge there is, our experience tells us that once that happened, some of these communities just shifted from giving away plastic bags at the checkout counter to giving away paper bags. Okay, and it's not sufficient to just replace one single-use bag with another. And so we support what's called a hybrid approach. Okay, so that's a ban on plastic with a charge or a fee on paper bags and other type of reusable bags that are made available at the checkout counter. What this does is it produces a shift in consumer behavior and a financial disincentive for people to reach for that single-use bag. It gives people an incentive to actually bring their own bags. And by promoting that shift in consumer behavior, we've seen in other areas significant reduction in the number of bags that are being taken at the checkout counter. Okay, so that's a critical piece of this. Here in Connecticut, Citizens Campaign for the Environment is working with BYOCT, which Daphne brought up before, Live Green Connecticut, and a number of other stakeholders, Surfrider Foundation, and a few other groups. And we've been working with the Connecticut Food Association to try to find some common ground and a path forward to eliminate disposable bags. This is the first year in a number of years that the Food Association has said, we support banning plastic bags. And so our groups have been working together in a working group with the grocers to try to get some agreed upon language. And we're still working on the details. We don't have 100% agreement yet, but what we've been proposing, the environmental activists, is a phase out over 3 years. And so the grocers would actually eliminate thin plastic bags, the single-use bags that we've been talking about, while still being able to offer those thicker bags that they currently offer for sale at 10 cents a piece. And after a period of 3 years, or once an 80% reduction in plastic consumption has been achieved, whichever comes first, they would phase the bags out altogether. So that's what it is that we are proposing as environmental advocates. We haven't gotten 100% agreement on that yet. We're still working on some of the details. But if this passes, it could potentially be one of the strongest policies related to disposable bags in the nation. So that's very exciting, and we're going to continue to work at that. Some of the other work that CCE is doing focuses once again on other types of single-use plastics. So there's been a lot of talk about plastic tableware, plastic straws, plastic stirrers, and polystyrene containers. Single-use food service items create a significant source of low-grade plastics that once again are piling up in our material recovery facilities and make up an unnecessary volume of the waste stream. Polystyrene, or EPS, expanded polystyrene, most folks are familiar with styrofoam. That's a brand name. The material itself is referred to as polystyrene, and there's a few different brands out there. But these food service containers, cups, takeout containers, meat packaging trays, they cannot be recycled, and they take up unnecessary space once again in the solid waste stream. On top of that, plastics that end up in incinerators, which is where most of our trash here in Connecticut goes, create dioxins and other types of harmful air pollutants, which create a significant environmental justice issue. Those incinerators are located in places like Hartford and Bridgeport. These are low-income, underserved communities that are disproportionately affected by this type of pollution and have disproportionate rates of asthma and other types of health problems. So that's an important part of this conversation as well. But what these items all have in common is that they are single-use items. These are not necessities. These are luxury single-use items for which there are cost-effective, readily available alternatives already on the market. And so once again, banning plastic bags, putting a fee on paper, this helps to get that low-grade plastic and contaminated paper out of the single stream and save municipalities money. But going after things like, I got my 5-minute warning, going after these other types of items like straws, stirrers, forks, and knives, there are alternatives on the market for those as well. And not only does it help to promote that shift in consumer behavior, but it also helps to encourage businesses to put in practice more sustainable behaviors as well. And so there are other solutions that we're promoting this year in relation to the solid waste crisis that we're dealing with here in Connecticut. Okay, expanding Connecticut's bottle bill and modernizing that system is one of them. Expanding to wine and liquor alone could capture an additional 125 tons of material annually and remove up to 21,300 tons of glass from the single stream every year. And implementing food waste composting. Food waste and organics make up more than 30% of our solid waste stream. And these are opportunities that are being explored in other places that we should, for all intents and purposes, be implementing here in Connecticut to once again help promote that source reduction, change consumer behavior a little bit, and get some really major environmental outcomes out of it as well. So that's a little bit about the work that we're doing. As I said, there's some materials in the back. One of the fact sheets there regarding single-use plastics and plastic bags actually has some contact information for how you can reach out to your local legislators and legislative leaders on this issue and weigh in with them, have your voice heard, and help us actually advance some of these policies in Connecticut. So really appreciate all your time, and if folks have any questions, they're more than welcome to reach out to me offline.
Thanks, Liz. Fascinating stuff. Just so you know, we are going to have a break. It's not for another